Gemini 3.6 Flash is 6.7 times cheaper per token than Fable 5. And if you're running high volume workloads, that gap is the difference between a $150 bill and a $1,000 one. 6.7 times cheaper, and that's not a rounding error. Both models dropped recently, and everyone's picking sides without actually looking at the numbers. So I went through official pricing pages, model cards, and independent benchmarks to compare Fable 5 versus Gemini 3.6 Flash across 5 head-to-head tests, sourced and verified. Gemini 3.6 Flash wins on cost by a mile, but there's one test coming up where that price gap stops mattering completely, and it could flip the whole decision for your workflow. So you'll want to stay for the conditional verdict. My name is Brian, and I'm in these tools 12 hours a day, so you don't have to be. I looked at every number both companies will actually stand behind, and I kept the verdict honest because picking the wrong model for your use case has a real dollar cost. Both tools are great, sure, but if you're running an agentic pipeline that fires 1 million tokens a day, the model you pick determines whether your API bill is $1,500 or $10,000 a month. That's the actual stakes here, and that's who this comparison is for. Test 1, token pricing and cost efficiency. At $50 per million output tokens, Fable 5 is the most expensive model Anthropic has ever listed. And if you run a batch job of 10 million output tokens, you're looking at $500 with Fable 5 versus $75 with Gemini 3.6 Flash. That delta is brutal. What surprised me, looking at the official pricing, is just how clean the gap is. Fable 5 runs $10 per million input tokens and $50 per million output. Gemini 3.6 Flash is $1.50 in and $7.50 out. That's 6.7 times cheaper on both sides, and cash input on Gemini is 85% cheaper than Fable's cash read. Gemini 3.6 Flash takes test 1, and it's not close. The cost structure alone makes Fable 5 hard to justify for volume work. I was expecting a gap, but 6.7 times cheaper across every pricing tier is a blowout. That puts Gemini 3.6 Flash up 1-0. Test 2, coding accuracy and reasoning. A solo dev shipping a production-grade feature on a deadline needs the model to actually solve the problem, not just attempt it. And on SWE Bench Pro, the gap between 80% and 49% is the difference between a working pull request and a broken one. I pulled the coding benchmarks, and Fable 5 is number 1 globally on SWE Bench Pro at 80.3%. On Frontier Code Diamond, it scores 29.3%, which is more than double Opus 4.8 and 5 times GPT 5.5. Bear in mind, Gemini 3.6 Flash has no published SWE Bench Pro figure, so the direct comparison isn't fully apples to apples. Fable 5 takes test 2 on coding. I was kind of expecting Gemini 3.6 Flash to be closer, given his deep SWE improvement to 49%. But Fable 5's 80.3% on SWE Bench Pro is a different tier of coding intelligence entirely. That ties the score up 1-1. Test 3, task execution speed and latency. 95 seconds to first token. That's Fable 5's time to first token number, and if you're running a user-facing app where someone's waiting on a response, that 95-second wait will kill your retention before the answer even shows up. I pulled artificial analysis data, and the numbers were pretty striking. Gemini 3.6 Flash outputs at 227.7 tokens per second versus Fable 5's 73.4, which is roughly 3 times faster on raw output. And on time to first token, Gemini hits 14.74 seconds, while Fable 5 sits at 95.53 seconds, which is 6.5 times slower. Gemini 3.6 Flash wins test 3 on speed, and it's not subtle. I was expecting a gap, but 6.5 times faster on time to first token is a massive operational difference for anything real time. That puts Gemini 3.6 Flash ahead 2-1. 2 tests left, and the next one is a context window test where both models are sitting on the same 1 million token window, and the one after that is the overall intelligence score that decides whether Fable 5's premium is actually earned. Test 4, context window and agentic capabilities. A solo dev running a long autonomous coding session with 100,000 lines of code base in context needs to know where the output cap actually cuts off, because hitting that ceiling mid-task means a broken agent and a restart from scratch. I checked both specs, and both Fable 5 and Gemini 3.6 Flash share a 1 million token context window. So on input, they're matched. Where they split is on max output. Fable 5 goes up to 128,000 output tokens, and Gemini 3.6 Flash caps at 65,536, which is roughly double the output headroom for Fable 5. Now, the gap on output tokens is real, but it's only going to matter for long-form generation or extended agentic runs. For most everyday tasks, 65,000 output tokens is more than enough. So this one really depends on your use case, and the context window tie means neither model has a structural advantage on input. This one's a tie. Both models match on context input at 1 million tokens. And while Fable 5's 128,000 output cap is a real edge for long-form agentic work, it doesn't change the score here. Scoreboard stays at 2 for Gemini 3.6 Flash, 1 for Fable 5 with 1 tied. Test 5, benchmark gains and token efficiency. Bench LM 82.8 versus 75.3. That's the overall intelligence gap between these two models. And if you're running complex reasoning chains where a wrong answer costs you a rerun at $50 per million output tokens, that 7.5 point gap is worth paying attention to. What surprised me here is how clean Fable 5's lead is on Bench LM. 82.8 out of 100 versus Gemini 3.6 Splash at 75.3. On the flip side, Gemini 3.6 Splash cuts output tokens by 17% compared to its predecessor, which is a real efficiency gain, though I couldn't find a comparable published figure for Fable 5 to directly benchmark that. Fable 5 takes Test 5 on overall intelligence, Bench LM 82.8 versus 75.3, is a 7.5 point gap that reflects a genuinely smarter model for complex reasoning work, and that ties the whole series up. Fable 5.2 wins, Gemini 3.6 Splash 2 wins one tied. Fable 5 is the clear winner when raw intelligence is what you need. It's number one globally on Sawi Bench Pro at 80.3%. It scores 29.3% on Frontier Code Diamond, which is 5 times GPT-5. It leads Bench LM at 82.8, and its 128,000 output cap is double what Gemini 3.6 Flash can produce. Gemini 3.6 Flash wins on everything cost and speed related. It's 6.7 times cheaper per token, outputs at 227.7 tokens per second, which is 3 times faster than Fable 5, and its time to first token is 14.74 seconds versus Fable 5's 95.53. Catch head input is also 85% cheaper at 15 cents per million tokens. So the series ended 2-2 with one tie, which is pretty much the most honest result you can get. If you need peak reasoning and coding accuracy for complex agentic work, Fable 5 is worth every penny of that $50 per million output tokens. If you need the cheapest, fastest token bill for high volume tasks, Gemini 3.6 Splash at 6.7 times cheaper is the right call. 6.7 times cheaper, that number decides it. I ran Gemini 3.6 Flash against Opus 4.8 next, and the speed advantage actually flips in some reasoning tasks while the price gap stays just as wide. So if you're trying to figure out where Flash's ceiling really is, that comparison is already on the channel.